our first official SJC meeting. And I just want to start off by saying that I really encourage you guys to sign up to present. I think all of you guys should have access to the Google Drive by now. And I also just want to say that our next meeting after this will be September 22nd, which is a Tuesday, and we'll always have our meetings at 4 p.m. And also just something to look forward to throughout the fall is that we'll always only have 2 meetings a month, because we don't want to stress you guys out. We know you guys have class, work, and all these other obligations to do as well. And we just want our club to be here for you guys and to be something that you guys look forward to, and just to hear from you guys about any research that interests you guys. And also another thing to kind of look out for, I know Rabeya may have emailed you guys over the summer about it, but for anyone who's new to our club, we have a t-shirt design competition going on, so be sure to check that out. And I think we have more details on that on our Instagram as well as on our blog. So with that being said, we have 2 amazing presentations lined up for you guys. We'll be hearing from Sam and Rabeya today, so whoever wants to start, you guys can just take it away.
I can
go first.
Go first. All right, so I can just share my screen?
You should be able to. I think I made you a co-host.
Thank you. There we go. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Well, my name is Samuel O'Farrell. This is my first meeting and presentation, so I'm very happy to be here. And I want to thank you for having me. I guess I'll just start off by saying this is not STEM or healthcare related, but I found it pretty interesting. So I'm just going to set the tone, and I'll just start off by saying it has been cooling down recently outside, and so I think we can take an opportunity to together just dip our toes into the fall, and let's just put ourselves about like a month and a half into the future where it's late October, because we're going to be talking about why do you like scary movies. And if you're interested in scary movies, then I'm going to tell you different reasons as to why you might like them, and if you hate them, then you're going to find out probably why and maybe things you can do to like them in the future. So this was also the title of the article I researched, and it was written by G. Neil Martin. He's a professor at Regent's University of London in the United Kingdom. He's involved in many areas of faculty, including Faculty of Humanities, Arts, Social Sciences, the School of Psychotherapy, and the School of Psychology. As we progress through this presentation, I'm going to be going over the basics of horror, the sex differences of those who enjoy horror, and the personality factors of people who enjoy horror. And then we're going to conclude with why things are scary and how the movie magic of the industry can make things extra scary during films. So first, like any scientific article, we have to define what we're looking at, and we're looking at horror films. So these are films made to frighten or shock the audience. And this is, I want to be clear, these are not thrillers. Even though thrillers have like frightening and scary scenes, the sole purpose of horror is to scare the audience. And another big factor about horror is that it's really just good versus evil, whether the antagonist is like a monster or the supernatural or a killer. They're usually all the same premise. And they're also considered the runt of cinema, with only one movie ever, horror movie ever winning Best Picture as an Oscar. Does anybody have a guess? You could put it in the chat on what you think the only Best Picture horror movie is.
Was it the one that came out last year?
No.
Oh, never mind.
It's I can't really see the chat right now.
Isn't it Silence of the Lambs?
Yep, Silence of the Lambs. My man. All right, and so we can move on from there. Where are they now? Well, they started to grow and popular in the 80s with only 2 movies ever making over $38 million. And now, however, in 2017, 15 movies made over $38 million, and 9 of them made over $100 million. And so before we move on to any of the research, I want you to think about if you like horror movies, because as we go through each research study, you could think about how you would stand on the compared to the other individuals that were studied. So first, I'm going to start off with the sex differences. And there was three major articles, research studies inside this article done by these three different people. And so instead of just going through each one and listing everything from each one, I'm just going to start off by talking like the basics and then conclude it all together as, because they complement each other very well. And so the first one was done by King, CM, and Harani in 2007, and they manipulated the endings of horror movies. And they, on top of this, they changed the level of violence and gore within the movie. Johnston, what they did is they looked at adolescents' motivation for horror movies, and then Oliver looked at adolescents' enjoyment of horror movies. So if we take a look at all three of these together, if we start off with Harani, the way they manipulated the endings, it was either a traditional ending, meaning the antagonist died, or a teaser ending. So like the last scene, they happen to be still alive for some reason. And so what was interesting about this is that if there was a high amount of gore, it was enjoyed by both genders if the ending ended with the antagonist dying. But the interesting thing about this is that males, no matter if the antagonist lived or died, they still preferred gore and violence throughout the movie. And if we move on from this to Johnston, she researched that adolescents and males in general just prefer more destructiveness in movies. And they also liked retribution on the victim, meaning if the victim has some flaws, they want them to get what they deserve through some punishment of some kind throughout the movie. Females, on the other hand, identify with a female victim, which is most popular in horror movies. And so they usually experience more distress when watching horror movies. And the weird side note is that males still prefer a female victim for some reason. And I thought it'd be interesting to do more research on that as like a study of some kind, because it doesn't really make any sense as to why males would prefer the female being, haunted or whatever throughout the movie. The next study is on companionship, and this kind of replicates like a date night for a couple watching a movie. It was done by Zillman in 1986, and it was titled Effects of an Opposite Gender Companion's Effects of Horror on Distress, Delight, and Attraction. And so in English, this kind of just means that how people would react if they were accompanied by the opposite gender of the same age while watching a horror movie. And it was interesting because men enjoyed and engaged with the partner more if the female was distressed throughout the movie instead of like not being scared. And females, on the other hand, for some reason they found out that it didn't matter if the male was distressed or not, as long as they were attractive, they enjoyed the movie more. And I was wondering, I had the question to move on from this, is that are gender roles at play? And I was wondering, like, does the fact that the man is next to a woman change how he reacts into the movie? And if he's just saying he's not scared because there's a female next to him. So moving on from this, we can go over personality and how that relates to those who like horror. And the big five is, many of you probably heard of this if you've taken psychology. It's a psychological trait theory that addresses 5 main traits: extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. And so Claessens did a study on this in 2019, and they kind of just went over these 3 main ones: extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And they found that those who are more extroverted and higher agreeableness characteristics like horror movies more, and those with higher conscientiousness values aren't as scared as much after they finish the movie. And so now we're going to move on to what is scary. I'm going to show you 3 different pictures, and I want you to think about which one scares you the most, or makes you feel like you're endangered. And so Martin, who wrote the scholarly article, he notes that there's 2 types of fear in the real world. There's evolutionarily predisposed and cognitively conditioned. And so a lot of stuff that are evolutionarily predisposed are stuffs that we just have a gut feeling that we think can hurt us. If it's like a big animal or a spider or a snake, we have that feeling that we're endangered. Cognitively conditioned is something we have to think about. And so if you think about a gun, by itself, it can't do any harm unless it's operated. A lot of the, so if you look at a picture of a gun that's being pointed at you, you know you're in danger because a bullet can come out of that because it's being operated. And so these two types of fears are used a lot throughout horror movies, but it's interesting that we still get scared from them because there is no threat in horror movies. So why are they scary is the question. And it's interesting because the Martin, he goes over a thing called the startle reflex. This is a reflex we have where we blink or we jump or we have muscle contractions throughout our body when we get scared or when it's triggered. And this is easily done through jump scares throughout movies, commonly known as like the cheap shot of a horror movie. It's when it's quiet and then it gets loud. And this can be reproduced in laboratory settings with 50 milliseconds of 95 decibels of noise. This goes on to why the magic of sound is important in a horror movie. Many critics have claimed that horror is primarily a sound-based medium. It makes sense because if there was no sound in a movie, it'd be pretty obvious that it wouldn't be scary at all. So if we take the feeling of danger when we have no danger on us and the jump scares and the sound, and we pair this with suspense and the excitement of suspense, this is why people enjoy horror movies. In Zilman D's 1980 study called The Anatomy of Suspense, he goes over he goes over the excitation transfer theory. In this, he states that the main reason of horror enjoyment is the feeling of suspense. And it makes sense because as we start, getting thinking about what's going to happen next, and we become more filled with these thoughts. And these thoughts are called negative affect, and it's a personality variable where we start thinking about what's going to happen next. In the movie Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, who is labeled the master of suspense, there's a scene where you're looking in from the shower outside at the curtain, and you can see a black figure coming towards them. And so as we see the black figure, we start thinking about, is this a monster? Is this a bad person? What could this be? And we get filled with that feeling of stress. And once the stress ends, then, as Martin notes, there's something called a euphoria throughout this. And this is why a lot of people like horror. And so for those of you that don't like horror, Martin notes that it's probably because you don't get this feeling of euphoria and you just are stressed the entire time. And so moving on, the one thing that can help if you hate horror movies is desensitization. In Wilson and Cantor's 1987 study, they performed a study where they took children ages 5 through 9 and gradually exposed them to more and more snakes and videos and pictures of snakes. And then they showed them a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark where it's an Indiana Jones movie, and there's a scene where there's a snake pit involved. And so after the kids were exposed to all these videos of snakes, they eventually weren't scared at the movie at all. And so it shows that there's evidence that desensitization is successful when you're scared about something or when you're worried about something might happen to you. And so I was wondering, does this work with movies? Because I've noticed that the more you watch, or I watch horror movies, I get less scared as I've gotten older. But I mean, I still have some friends that no matter how many they watch, they're still going to be scared. And so I was wondering if there'd be a really cool study done about watching horror movies, and if that, as like the more you watch, has a correlation with not being scared eventually. Finally, I want to conclude, and I'm going to talk about, or I want to say that the next time you watch a horror movie, you can notice what is scaring you, and if it's cognitively conditioned fear or if it's evolutionarily predisposed. You could think about who you identify with, if you identify with the victim and how that affects your enjoyment of the film. You could think about how you're acting with, if you have a companion next to you, and see if you're acting different because they are there, like if you're on a date. And finally, you can think about if the ending affects how you are satisfied with the overall your enjoyment of the film, and if the violence was necessary for the ending. The next thing I want to say is that these are not concrete, and the author addressed many limitations. There's a big part of the article on empathy, and this there was he made a note that there's only 2 or 3 researchers on empathy, so it's not good to just take it as an absolute, because one of the studies said that people who are more empathetic, hate horror movies because they identify with the victim more. But if there's only 2 or 3 studies on this, it's not good to just say that empathetic people hate horror movies. And that's the beauty of science, because with more studies and more knowledge, it's just going to keep expanding on how much we actually know about the subject. And finally, this wasn't everything. So if you enjoyed anything I said, you can check out the article. I'm going to have a sources page. You can take a picture if you want coming up. And throughout the article, he discusses risks, mental health, old age, coping, and even neuropsychology. So if any of that interests you, it'd be fun to check it out in the article. Anyways, these are the sources I used. And if anyone wants them, I can send them to you if you just chat me privately. And I want to thank you for having me and letting me talk about horror movies.
Sam, that was definitely super interesting. I know for me personally, like, I guess like there's so much psychology behind everything that we're presented with. And I know that I definitely never like have thought about it that much in depth. So like you're like all that research about, okay, does someone identify more with the victim, the perpetrator and stuff like that? It's just really like interesting to think about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just going to catch up on this chat real quick. Yes, that was Alfred Hitchcock. Train to Busan was pretty good. I saw that one.
Oh, you watched it? Would you consider it a horror movie?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of scary parts of it if you're scared of zombies. The snake in Harry Potter was so creepy. Stay Force, yeah. Hereditary was really good too. I like that one.
I wanted to ask, do you think that these studies that these like ratios hold true in psychological horror movies? Stuff like what is it, Shutter Island, I think, with
You're
Leonardo.
saying like if you enjoy that, you're more extroverted and kind of stuff like that?
No, I'm wondering, like, do you think you were talking about earlier how males like enjoy gory horror movies more and stuff like that?
Yes.
That horror movie isn't necessarily like physically gory, you know what I mean? But there's almost like an innate gore to a psychological thriller, at least in my opinion. Like, you can imagine how horrible it is, even if there is no like blood shown on screen, really. And do you think that like holds true as like males like those types of movies because there is sort of that innate like brutal aspect to it, or do you think those movies would be like have a more even distribution between males and females?
No, that's a really good point, and I didn't even think about that. A lot of the article talked about gore, which is pretty interesting to me, but it's weird how they only really focus on that. But I can double check and or you could just look at the article if you want. But I don't know. I kind of feel like it'd be more evenly balanced. It noted that if there's a lot of disgusting aspects in the movie, then the females really didn't like it a lot at all. And so I don't know if psychological is really disgusting as it is just more like, thought provoking. I feel like that'd be pretty evenly split. What about you?
See, I think it would still like fall in male's favor because at least when I watched Shutter Island, watching through the movie, there's just sort of like that buildup of tension. But at the end, when it's revealed like how his psyche shattered, I think that's a lot more brutal than just like the scenes of personally to me that was more brutal than like zombies ripping throats out or like A24 Hereditary where like she gets decapitated by the street sign. Like just learning about how he was broken and like how he's stuck in this loop that his mind's created to like try and hold his sanity together. I think that's pretty brutal and gory in its own right. But that's just my opinion. I have no like scientific study backing that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It would be cool to see studies on psychological horror and how that affects each gender and stuff like that. Does anyone else have any questions?
Wait, going off what Hassan said, for me personally, like the blood and the gore, like it's just annoying for me. It's not as much scary, but I definitely agree with Hassan's point that like the psychological stuff. Like I know for me, I know a lot of people probably wouldn't consider Black Mirror horror, but some of the episodes, like the psychological stuff in some of the episodes, I feel like to me it gets me thinking more than like a zombie movie or just something like that.
Mm-hmm. It was, it was another fact or that another study that they did that didn't include. It was talking about nurses, graduate nurses watching operational videos, and it noted that when it was real life and it was like that kind of gore, real life like body operations, the nurses they weren't disgusted at all. They more felt sad for the victim more than the male nurses did. That's another point. Since you said you don't mind gore at all.
Honestly, I think part of it makes me wonder, like, especially with the male female aspect, maybe it's like just the way that our society like conditions women, I guess, or like men as well. Like the emotional display rules, like in Western society, it's more common for men to like express anger or like more negative emotions, while like, women are kind of like internalize those emotions. It's kind of like you're not supposed to display those emotions and stuff like that. I don't know. I wonder if like the way we're socialized to like express emotion kind of plays into how we view horror and gore and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's what I was also wondering about if because a male is next to a woman, and if they're like, they have the masculinity effect where they want to seem masculine, if they're just saying they're not scared, or if they actually are not scared. What happens if we consider the fluidity of gender? I mean, that's the same case. If you what's the word? If you identify as a male, you're probably likely to still be more I would say protective than against like if you're with a companion you want to pursue and stuff.
Um, Another question: do you think like there's an escapism effect in horror movie for some people? Like, this is kind of weird, but Saw, which isn't necessarily the greatest psychological thriller of all time, is a pretty like, middle of the road horror movie. But I know a lot of people who like try and figure out the Saw puzzles, like how they would get themselves out of that situation if they were put in that situation by, a psychotic madman. And like, that's a really weird form of escapism, but does that constitute escapism where they're like, yeah, if I was in this high stress situation, with this puzzle, how would I solve it? Is that like people using that to try and sort of escape any real life stress they might have? Because like I know a lot of people like watch horror movies when they have exams and stuff too, to just sort of take a break. But I don't know. That's just something I noticed with my friends in
Oh
college.
yeah, that's a great point, man. I mean, can you I never even heard of escapism. Can you define that for me?
What I'm talking about with escapism is like when you play a video game or you read a book or something, but rather than just sort of like reading it from an outsider perspective and you're just like looking in at events that have been laid out for you, you like place yourself in those events. A lot of like kids' books really play off of escapism. Like Harry Potter is a famous example. They like world build the world around you so well that it's not just like Harry Potter and his friends and you're like watching as a third party. You're like there in the action with him, right? Because it's all first person descriptions. It's all like the environment's described for you. A lot of video games, you like make a character and put them in the video game world rather than like play a pre-made character who already has a personality and stuff. So like that's escapism.
No, yeah, then in that case, yeah, I definitely think that that's a big part of horror movies too. And there was actually a point about that where it was like those who have a more wandering mind and enjoy like have a bigger imagination about being in the same situation as the victim in a horror movie, they had to enjoy it more than those who are pretty rigid. And that's why like people who are high in consciousness don't get scared as much because they're just like looking at it like it's nothing happening. But if you imagine more and if you fall under and you're into escapism like you were talking about, then yeah, it would make sense that watching Saw and thinking about what you would do in that situation would have you enjoy the film more than someone who didn't really care about that, especially if you're with friends and you're talking about like what you would do. That makes sense. That's a good point.
Yeah, actually, I read an article over the summer and it was talking about like violence in media and just like, I guess, how commonplace like gory stuff has become. And I think Hudson, you and me talked about this when we had that presentation about AI over the summer. You know how there's like this whole big debate about, okay, should violent video games be allowed? Should we kind of like monitor like kids playing it?
Oh
And
yeah,
this,
the virtual reality.
yeah, the virtual reality stuff. So the study that I read over the summer, I'll see if I can find it and like link it in one of our blog posts or something. But basically the study was like, you know, because we have all these different ways to kind of like what Hassan's saying, like escape from our own negative emotions and feelings of violence and stuff like that, we can kind of channel that in and it can be kind of like a cathartic experience, like watching all these horror movies or playing these violent video games because you're channeling all your real life frustration into like seeing it played out on the screen and stuff like that. And I think this study said that like I think it was just kind of like an opinion piece, but the guy was kind of like, I think this is a really good way for like our society to prevent like real life crime and violence if we have like this way in media to like deal with our emotions, I guess. I don't know, it was interesting.
No, that is interesting. That's awesome.
Well, thank you, Sam. That was a really good presentation. I'm sure it got all of us thinking more about horror. And now we'll have Rabeya present to us about her topic.
Thank you for having me.
Before I start presenting, I know Sam presented on a horror movie. And I just wanted to say, like, presenting on topics that are non-STEM related or like not like the usual STEM or like pre-med track related topics, that's totally fine. Like, we really want a broad range of topics being presented. So if anyone wants to present on anything, please feel free to sign up.
Literally anything, y'all, like anything.
Yeah. But on that topic, mine's is kind of science related. Okay.
Fake.
I know. I'm sorry. Okay. So my article was about how electronic waste and gold recycling. So gold is important because, you know, we use it for jewelry, but we also use it in a lot of the electronics in their hardwares. So your phone, your tablets, laptops, wires, they all have gold in it. And the reason they use gold is because it doesn't like rust or get like, you know, break easily. And in 2007, more than 2 tons of gold, more than 2 tons of gold was discarded, hidden in electronic waste just in Germany. And then in 2016, $22 billion of gold was thrown away in electronic waste. And what they have been using for now to get like gold out of the electronics is electrolysis, but the reason it doesn't work is because it's very expensive and it's also like complicated. So only 10 to 15% of the gold is actually recovered. And the reason that it's important to like recover the gold is because it's used so much in electronics. That's like basically the future of the world, but it's also a natural resource that's being depleted a lot. And it's causing the price of gold to increase a lot every year. So Delftia is a bacteria that secretes Delftiabactin, and Delftiabactin is a non-ribosomal peptide, which basically means it can be synthesized without mRNA. And large-scale production of non-ribosomal peptide in E. coli could revolutionize the recovery of gold from electronic waste. The E. coli aspect is important, but I'll discuss that more later. So the specific genes that help Delftia become like, you know, so Delftia basically can take gold solutions and turn it into like actual gold particles. And the genes that help it do that is the del E, del F, del G, and del H. And they're directly responsible to produce Delftiabactin. And on the side, it's like the specifics of what they actually do. So what they did in this article is that this has kind of been known for like some while now that Delftia can do this, and they like did different experiments to see like different aspects of how Delftia turns gold solutions into like gold particles. And they started by testing an old article. So the previous article stated that Delftia could do this, and they wanted to make sure the experiment was correct. So they took an agar plate and put gold chlorine solution, and they put Delftiabactin in it. And as you can see on the top, that's where the gold precipitate is, because that's where the bacteria grew. And the best part about this experiment is that it actually worked better than what the previous article stated. So in the next experiment, they used D-acidivorans SPH1, so it's just a different version. And basically they had test tubes filled with different concentrations of Delftiabactin, and then they added different concentrations of the gold chlorine solution. And here's like a little clip showing that experiment. So basically these are the test tubes with the Delftiabactin, and then they add the gold chlorine solution, and they tried to see how long it took for the Delftia to like start doing it. And basically when it turned black, that's how you knew that the gold was precipitated. And as you can see on the right side, it took a lot longer because the ratio was off, so there wasn't enough Delftiabactin in the test tube for it to work properly. So what they found is the optimal ratio of gold ions to Delftiabactin is 1:1, or the process is really slowed. Okay, so then from that test tube, they took out the gold particles and then they melted them, and then it created like the little gold particles you see in C, like just like the little specks. And then they melted that down further and it created like a gold bar. And so now it's like recycled and can be used again. So this result basically just proved that Delftiabactin can do its job in an, lab isolated type of experiment. Like it does work and it can precipitate the gold. So then they did a more real world experiment. So they used an old CPU, which is basically just hardware from like an old laptop, and they went in with like pliers and tweezers and like took out the gold part from the hardware and put it into a test tube. And then they used aqua regia to dissolve the gold into like this liquid form. And then they diluted it with gold chloride solution. And you can see those processes in A, B, and C. And then they added Delftiabactin to it, and as you can see in slide F, there's like really thick circles of brown and like kind of like goldish, because that's where like the gold precipitated and it extracted from the solution, and that's where the bacteria was. So this was amazing because it did prove that Delftia can successfully recycle pure gold from electronic waste. But the negatives was that Delftia, sorry, my computer does that a lot. The negative was that Delftia takes a long time to grow. So the colonies took 2 to 3 days to grow, which is not very is kind of a long time if you want to do it on a large scale. And then also had to grow in an ACM medium, which is just more expensive than growing it in just like a regular agar plate. So they wanted to use E. coli, so that's more marketable to companies and they could like do this on a larger scale. And that's what engineers and scientists have been working on now. So they're trying to transfer the genes del E, del F, del G, del H into E. coli, so that E. coli can precipitate the gold from gold solutions. And the reason that this is so difficult and only Delftia and a few other bacteria can do this is because gold is actually really toxic to most bacteria. So they need special genes so that they can actually like work in high concentrations of gold. And the issue with the expressing the genes in the E. coli was that del H is very toxic to E. coli. So this is a graphic, and the blue portion that's highlighted, that was actually the portion that they found out to be toxic. And I think that was the transfer site, or it's like the first transfer site, and that's why it wasn't working. So whenever they tried to do the translation and like express it in E. coli, it would always cause mutations. So either the E. coli would just die or it would mutate and just like not be functional anymore. But they did find a way to transfer the genes into E. coli, everything besides the del H gene, but it still worked. Like it still precipitated the gold. So this is the zone of inhibition test. And as you can see, the negative control and the MM-CoA plasmid look exactly the same. So the antibiotics they put in there did not work, and that means the bacteria survived. So it's like the gene was successfully transferred and the bacteria like stay alive. So in the real world application, this is how it would be used. The electronic waste would be dissolved with aqua regia in like a giant tank, and then at the same time in a different tank, they would be the E. coli would be producing the Delftiabactin, and then they would put those together, and Delftiabactin would just do its job and just precipitate the gold, and they could melt that down then and just use it as recycled gold, and it would be ready to like be used back in electronics or as jewelry or whatever, and then they could just get rid of like the waste, and this would be a lot more like this would just help recycle a lot more gold than what is being recycled now. Yeah. Are there any questions?
So is this relatively easy to acquire?
Delftiabactin is, I guess, easy to acquire. Oh, actually, I think it only grows in certain parts of the world or like in certain areas. So not really, but if they could make, that's why they want to do it in E. coli, because E. coli is just common, easy to use. But the actual like translating or expressing the genes in E. coli, it was a very difficult process. But I feel like once you get the process down, then it wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah. Okay.
I know, as I understand it, these bacteria would be used to like recover gold that's been used in electronics and stuff.
Mhm.
Is that actually cheaper than just like asking gold hoarding countries and companies to give up some gold for electronic use?
I don't know, man. I asked them. I can't.
Honestly, I imagine it would be really difficult.
Yeah. I mean,
I
if
mean,
they want to, they could by now.
I was gonna say it's something like what,
I imagine this whole thing-
190,000 tons that's being held.
Gold is fake, guys.
I think it's more of a sustainability issue than it is a political issue. I think we need to understand the fact that gold, one, it takes mining power, so it uses water and labor, and it displaces land. So it's more of a sustainability issue. If we can recover gold that was already used for more products, that then lowers the use of the need for more mining, which then in turn is less water, and less labor. And a lot of gold comes from countries where labor is very cheap and unfair. So I feel
That's
it should
actually really true.
I
Like, obviously, if there's factories in like America, the people working in the factories and stuff would be paid a lot better wages than if people are like, being forced to mine.
I agree, Nader, but I also think tapping into gold hoards would reduce mining to a much greater extent, because it would be one thing if we had like a very minimal reserve of gold on the surface, and so like mining would resume in 20 years, but like if we started actively using the gold that's hoarded to like maintain the gold standard that's already defunct in like most economies, we wouldn't have to mine for thousands of years, even with our current rate of electronic production.
While I agree with that, I think it's two separate issues. I think one of them is utilizing resources we already have to then help create more resources, while another one is more of a political issue. I feel like, yes, you're right, but that doesn't change the fact that technology can still be used, like e-waste can still be used to create more gold.
Right, I think Nader brings up a really good point. I feel like it just shows, like, even with the science that we're creating, and I think this is a topic we touched on over the summer as well. Like, you guys have all these brilliant presentations on all these important topics, but sometimes, like, applying that science can be really difficult, like, with social, political factors and stuff like that. Like, there's just so much that goes into it, right? So I don't know. I think what Nader's saying is really important to think about as well, because I know at least one issue that's really like important in North Carolina, it's kind of like fracking oil and stuff like that. Like obviously that's horrible for their like just for like the ecosystem and just for the environment and stuff like that. So I guess it just highlights like the importance of like we need more research on like sustainable methods to like harvest and like cultivate all these natural resources and stuff like that.
And it's also hard to get companies to agree to implementing sustainable practices, no matter how cheap they are, honestly, because they already have like an alternative, especially big companies like Amazon and like
yeah,
Walmart.
companies are not your friends. Like they might seem all friendly, but in my opinion, companies are not your friend. Yeah.
So I think that's why scientists have to work so much extra to create the most easiest, and like they have to do research for years to even like bring up these solutions to companies, because like they won't like, most companies won't pay for you to do research on sustainability. Like that's not what they're there for.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not making them any more money.
No, Rabeya, that's a really good point. And what's interesting to me too is that a lot of companies like they like usually we're like, do the research, look at the research, look at what scientists say. But what to me is really interesting is that these companies have their own scientists working for them, where they can like kind of like fake research in a way. Like a really interesting thing right now that I'm not sure if a lot of you know about is like the supplement industry. Like I'm sure all of us know someone who's taking a vitamin supplement or some other type of supplement. A lot of these industries, like the majority of them, like Walmart, Target, all these other people who make their own supplements, they, first of all, the stuff that's in the ingredient, like what's on the label is not actually what's in it. And they actually have so many like websites and research articles, like reputable people. Like I think there was 2 Stanford professors, I'm forgetting the name of the supplement company, where they essentially like rewrote this guy's, like this manufacturing company's like data to make it look more presentable. And just because they had the clout of being like this well-known professor, they were able to get published into like a really good paper and stuff like that. And then it was only after the FDA was like, wait a minute, like that's not right, and they like made them take it off the market. The Stanford professors literally just retracted it, and they basically had little to no like lashback on that. So we just have to be really careful. And this is why like I love this club, so we can really like read research, like read the articles for yourself, like think about the discussion, the results and stuff like that, and like just critically evaluate everything that you're seeing.
I know a lot of people, so if anyone else has questions, I'll take it in a minute, but I know a lot of people have taken sociology of medicine or are going to, but like, even if you don't, this point is like really helpful in the discussion we're having right now. The same thing that Maya said about the Stanford scientist, we had to do a discussion post about like the sugar industry and stuff for our sociology of medicine, and someone actually did a really good presentation about the sugar industry over the summer, and it's on our YouTube channel if you guys want to go watch it. But like literally these scientists from Harvard were paid by the sugar industry to basically point the blame at like cholesterol or like fatty foods and carbs that give you heart problems, and they were like, don't say sugar gives you heart problems, so that the sugar industry could thrive. And that's why there's literally like high fructose corn syrup and everything, and it's like not it's not regulated by the FDA, even though that stuff gives you so, like, it's so bad for you. And it's like, if you look at any label for almost anything, soy sauce, chips, burgers, like I'm talking about anything, you will see added sugars in like everything we eat. And in the long term, it's so bad for you. Like people didn't eat added sugars and processed food as much as they do now. And a lot of it is because the sugar industry was never regulated. The same way when the meat industry was really like, you know, shitty, like it wasn't regulated by the FDA, and eventually the FDA, that's why it was started and stuff. Wait, sorry, someone had a question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Rabeya, another thing that what you said about added sugars and stuff, I think it's so interesting, kind of like just the discussion that we were having a couple of minutes ago about how everything connects, like all the research connects with all these social factors and cultural factors, because it was like really in a lot of countries in the West when the Industrial Revolution happened, like you had all like, okay, come on, like, okay, we all know that like companies pay their workers like shit, right? So in the Industrial Revolution, like all these workers were getting paid so little. And the companies knew this, like all these big like factories and stuff like that, they specifically started like saturating the market with added sugars and like saturated sugars. So that way, even though they pay their workers like trash, they can still afford to eat. and the food that they do get is fortified with all these sugars. So even though it's not nutritious, at least they're getting energy and calories from it. And y'all actually look it up because there's so many studies done, like analyzing the relationship between like all these added sugars and obesity and poverty. Like it's really scary. Like honestly, I think it's scary in my opinion. So I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it.
And yeah, and then also the tobacco industry did the same thing. Like when tobacco was first in the 90s, it was literally using like a Coca-Cola ad for like being cool. Like if you want to be cool, you should smoke. And then they also actually, if you do the research, tobacco when it first came out was a health product. A health product. Like they were like, it's gonna help you stay healthy, smoke tobacco. And now everyone who has lung cancer, it's like, it's basically, it's called like the manufacturers of illness, and they like start like they push you into like these diseases, and then by the time you have the doctors actually can help you, you're already so far gone that like that's it. Like, and the hospitals play a role in it too, because like why would they want people to stay healthy? Like healthcare is like such a business in America. Like they don't care if you're sick. They're making so much money off you being sick. So like it's not like they're doing anything, but like preventive medicine is like the up and coming medicine in America, because obesity is like the #1 cause of death, and then like there's so many heart problems because of added sugars, and then smoking because of lung cancer. Like it's actually really, really scary, and a lot of people have kidney diseases too. Like it's just so many issues. But like when these industries first became really big in America, they like were not considered what they are today. And even the fact that juuling is now like, people are like, oh yeah, tobacco sucks, why would you do that? But then they go and juul, like
It's the jewel, yeah.
like it's like, and like people are like, no, juuling makes you cool. But now like 5 years later or 2 or 3 years later, people are like, do not juul, that's the worst thing you can do, all these added things, blah blah blah. It's like, and then they're like, why didn't people know? But it's like some people really didn't know, and I'm like, oh my god. If anyone on here juuls, I'm not adding you. It's okay, I get it. But like, I'm just saying,
you can't redact what you just said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, y'all cool, but like, it's not, the industry sucks, man. I'm just.
She was like, y'all are all stupid and ugly, but I don't mean it.
If I can,
I won't have lung cancer, but I'll support you.
Rabeya, to sort of cut in on your point and to comment on what Nader said earlier, I agree with you, Nader. Like, I don't think the ability to recycle gold is inherently negative, but the fact that Delphitia is being developed to recycle gold from used electronics,
Delphia, man.
so
Delphia. That's my life.
so that this recycled gold can then be used by companies to produce more electronic waste that scientists spend money trying to recycle. It's forwarding the cycle we're all talking about when we're discussing other like scientific improvements that were made purely to facilitate like companies maintaining their lifestyles. Like Delphitia itself isn't wrong, or Delphia or whatever. It's not wrong to be able to recycle gold. What's wrong is not having companies use their gold stores first to like, you know, normalize the price of gold before we do this, because then you're just facilitating them hoarding gold.
Which is why we as Gen Z need to be enforcing corporate social responsibility and conducting more research in order to efficiently use these resources and force companies to hold themselves accountable in a social aspect and care about the world and the environment more than profit.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's pretty much what I'm saying now. That like my issue isn't with the ability to recycle gold. It's like if we
corporations 100%.
Yeah, if we can recycle gold, I don't think we should be like marketing that to corporations. Like, hey, you remember all that gold you wasted? Why don't you keep the rest of the gold you're hoarding? And like,
personally, I think that all the gold recycling and stuff like that and e-waste should be handled by third-party organizations that are meant specifically for their ethical purposes rather than the corporations themselves. So then those resources can be allocated or sent or used for research rather than have big corporations reuse those products and create more and more waste.
Yeah, Ruby, your point is really good too. I mean, I agree. And I agree with you as well now that it's just, I know. It has to be like I think it would have to be really carefully balanced, because like that's the fear is like corporate abuse of technology to facilitate corporatism.
I think we should all just blame the 1%. So
no, they're me.
They set up the guillotine outside Jeff Bezos' house.
No more socialist discussion.
I'm there for it.
I finally have someone to back me up, because Hassan keeps coming up my neck over the summer. Now they're on here. You do. You always
Fire.
touch my neck when I
You-
talk about the 1%.
I don't come at your neck when you talk about the
You always
1%. I
touch my
explained to
neck.
you that your economic ideas aren't
Wait.
right.
How do I mute y'all?
Sorry.
We'll mute ourselves. It's okay.
If anyone wants to have a discussion of socialism, capitalism, please write a freaking article, just blog post, like send us anything, because Myra and Hudson will have a conversation for days about socialism versus capitalism. So if
You
guys
don't
are
even have to
interested-
write an article. Just say you want to do that. We'll talk about it in the next call.
Yeah, they will talk about it for hours. So before they start that,
Wait,
anyway.
Rabeya, one last point on what you said about the tobacco industry. No, I think those of you who are here for the summer heard me talk about this before, but I really recommend this class if you can take it. I took a class called on Cancer Throughout the Ages. It was taught by Dr. Parks, and the class number is HON 296. And basically, like, we talked about how in the 1950s, like, it was pretty much a well-known fact that, like, tobacco was really bad for you, but it was all these paid scientists who worked for tobacco companies that were putting out all this literally fake research showing it was good. But the tobacco companies themselves, like, in their own internal records, they had literally like at least a century's worth, and I'm not even exaggerating, literally 100 years of worth of like research showing how bad tobacco is for you. And it wasn't until a court case in 1954 that like a US judge mandated that, I forget the name of the company, but this tobacco company had to open its own reserves, like, to be investigated to see if these claims were true or not. And going back onto how like all this research ties into like the real world, when all of this became public knowledge in the Western world, a lot of tobacco companies started targeting third world and developing countries. So in America and in the Western world, although like the rate of cigarette nicotine use has pretty much dropped like a lot from what it was in the 1950s, the rate that it's dropped by here, it's risen by that exact rate exponentially in third world and developing countries. So it's just interesting, and just another thing to be like conscious of, like, about how all these different factors like tie into science and STEM, and just like trying to make like science education more accessible to like literally everyone, because I feel like we can all benefit from it, like from hearing about all this research and stuff like that and how it applies to our everyday lives.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they did put cocaine in Coca-Cola when it first came out.
Cocaine was marketed as a gum relief agent for like years, so.
Yeah, a lot of doctors back in the day used to use cocaine like to stay awake and do their work.
Yeah, even a lot of truck drivers and stuff, they like use a lot of drugs, like usually heroin or something, to stay awake during long drives. It's actually really sad, because like they need to drive all night long and all day, and like that's hard to literally be alone on the road all the time. And you know what's funny? I don't know if this is completely true, but the male people, they used to have two people in a mail truck so that they wouldn't get like bored and like lonely. But then, you know, pay cuts and everything, they like made it one person per.
Wait, that's so sad.
I know, that's actually sad, right?
So sad.
Yeah, that's why
I
there's
think-
like 2 seats in the front, because they're used
Wait,
to.
oh.
Hey guys, my name's Hamza. I think what else is really interesting is that knowing something, but then actually implementing it, the time and change that it takes from that. Like, we all know that corporations are bad, and we all know a lot of these things. And I was actually reading this article. I think I can try and send it. But it was kind of talking about the adaptation of an ideology, and then when it actually comes to implementing it, the amount of time that it takes. That's something that should be noted too. So like, if we all collectively come together and we're like, hey, this is really bad, you know, corporations shouldn't have access to all this gold, that's one thing. But when it actually comes to implementing the ideology and actually doing it in practice, that takes a long time when it comes to like writing legislation and stuff. And I don't know, I just thought that'd be interesting.
No, Hamza, you're definitely right. But honestly, I feel like money has so much to do with it. Like, especially in like I guess going off like Sam's presentation, just like, I mean, I know his was on horror, but just in general, like the media that we consume every day. So I'm taking a nutrition class right now, and we're talking about supplements. Like, that's the only reason I went on that rant about supplements earlier, and about how like actually bad they are for you. So in like the 70s, or no, in the 90s, the director of the FDA at the time, he really wanted to crack down on like the lack of regulations in the supplemental industry. But the people who literally, these corporations are so powerful, they bought out so much like marketing time on TV and stuff like that. And the public was just filled with all these ads of even Hollywood celebrities saying, what do you mean? It's just my supplements. Like, you want them to take away your right to take away like supplements? And more people wrote Congress about not regulating supplements than people wrote letters about the freaking Vietnam War. Like it's just insane to me, like the way that people can like market things and like persuade the average person to do stuff like that. Like education, like I don't know, I feel like just scientists in general kind of like, especially with COVID, like I feel like they suck at conveying like their research in terms that the average person can understand, you know? I don't know, that's my 2 cents on it. I don't know how y'all feel about it.
But
for
that's
me,
governmental
all these scientists-
propaganda, right? Because the Vietnam War was what, the late 60s, early 70s, wasn't it? Right?
Yeah, no, I think
that was the time when like 007 was like James Bond was literally CIA propaganda to make people believe that the CIA was more of a spy institution than like controlling us and giving us anti-communist and socialist values. But like all of the U.S. believed the Vietnam War was actually a right.
My mom's in
fight.
love with James Bond.
Like the whole entire U.S. believed that the Vietnam War was a viable, like truly like right war for so long.
I think what the issue boils down to is it's more of us as individuals kind of using fear as a way to control each other. I mean, you can kind of see this throughout civilizations. It, changes name, changes practices, oftentimes religion. And, we see this a lot in a lot of communities, but it's like, brother, if you do this, you will be burned in hell. Brother, if you do this, you will be banished to the hellfire for the rest of eternity. And now you kind of see that perpetuate in different aspects. Now it's like, oh, I got to have a gun in case someone, pulls up on me. It's like, bro, you're in the suburbs going to the grocery store. You don't need a gun. And a lot of it is we see from our centralized governments in which they use these fear and they use our deep-rooted emotions to kind of control us. So I think that's really what it is. And it's just like everything you guys have said is totally right. But yeah.
How did we go from gold recycling to fear mongering and propaganda? Wow.
It's
Interconnectivity. That's what this club's about.
We should wrap up soon.
Interdisciplinary approaches.
We should wrap up soon because we want to keep it into an hour, but I'll definitely be posting a blog post about this if you guys want to continue. So make sure to check out our blog. We'll send that in a follow-up email soon. The last thing I'm just going to say is when I commented on my post, I kind of said like, yeah, like the food industry sucks and tobacco industry sucks, but like how do people not know? Like I thought it was like common knowledge, like food is like, sugary foods is bad for you and like tobacco is bad for you, etc., stuff like that. But the thing is, like, when you like grew up and the industries have been telling you different, or like you didn't, like that education really didn't come from school, that education came more from my parents. So it's just kind of like weird how like marginalized groups, like it's just the education from their parents. So how much education your parents have, that's how much education you're gonna have on a lot of things, like taxes. You don't learn about that in school, like how to get like a loan for a house, etc. Like same thing with like nutrition, how much you cook at home, like even cooking, like you don't learn how to cook and clean at school. You learn that from your parents or whoever's taking care of you. So I think like it was kind of crazy how like generationally there's just such a big gap and stuff. Honestly, I could go about like
a big one for that is the stock market. I feel like if your parents stock market, then you're going to be into the stock market as well.
I invested in the stock market, but I don't really know what to do with it. So.
Yeah, she doesn't.
And you jumped out. The economy is fake. Inflation is fake. Hassan, stay mad.
I mean, I've explained to you, you're not wrong, but you're basically wrong.
We're not talking about the economy, but like another weird way to, okay, this is like kind of more like real world, but I was watching like the like basketball game, like the NBA games or whatever. It was kind of weird. Okay, this like how all the basketball players are black, but most of the the basketball teams are owned by white people. Like it's just like it's crazy how like generationally like how much things are just so similar to how much things were like 100 years ago. Like there's some generational gaps that you cannot like solve by like these quick fixes that the government is trying to do and stuff. Like you need to change the system if you're going to make any real change, because it's all just like it's like fake change. It's like so weird. Okay.
And I know we were going to end the meeting, but I want to say one thing to respond to Hamza. I think when you were talking about like long-term change, I also think it probably takes a really long time if you look at it from a systemic approach. Like you talked about enforcing legislation, But I think, and I'm not saying you have to believe this one way or another, but there is the approach of causing change outside of the current system, like systemic change in the sense of altering the withstanding system rather than trying to create change within the system, and that might be a more like expedited route to control companies.
Yeah, anyways, like it's just weird because like we were talking about in class how like the common people don't have like 20 to 30 hours to research everything they eat. You know, if they look at a label and it's like, oh, 40 calories per serving, they're just gonna get it. Like they're not gonna think about like all the added sugars in this, and they're not gonna look at each scientific name. Like no one has time for that, you know. So I just think it's like how little we know and how much we're like controlled by our institutions, and like classes like that just really make you think. Anyways, thank you guys for a really good meeting. We hope to see you in 2 weeks. Our next meeting is September 22nd. There will be constant updates on our Instagram, so please go follow at STEM Journal Club. And we also have a blog at STEM Journal Club NCSU/WordPress. And the blog and Instagram are always linked in all of our emails if you ever want to find them. So
and guys, the blog is on the Office of Undergraduate Research website. And I just want to let you guys know, you never know who's reading that. You never know who might see that. So it's always really good to practice like writing in the sciences and just like practice concise writing. And Rabeya, Samuel, thank you guys so much for such good presentations. I think we had really good conversation. And I just want to take a minute again to encourage all of you guys to please sign up for presentation times. Like we love to hear from you guys. You can pick literally any topic you want, just as we had today. And we just really want to help you guys like read research, talk about research with us as well. So please sign up for times. You guys all have access to the Google Drive. And remember, the next meeting is September 22nd at 4 p.m. And we'll send you guys more info about that as it comes. So please sign up.
So this is like what Myra was talking about. So it's Office of Undergraduate Research. That's the NC State page. And if you go under publications, STEM Journal Club blog is like right there. So this is a really good way to get published in a sense, especially during COVID, where you're not going to there's no way you're going to get in a lab. Like even professors aren't in, like labs are shut for the semester. So this is a really good way to get published somehow. And over the summer, we had Dr. Hartstone come speak. He's like a really renowned veterinary researcher. And we had a couple pre-med students come speak as well. So we're trying to get professors and other like students to come speak to the club. So please present and publish, because you never know who's listening. That's how I got my research position for this semester. And some people have spoke to Dr. Hartstone about getting research with him when he came to speak. So
also, Rabeya's research project, the Delftia project, it's also being done by our STEM Journal Club advisor, Dr. Carlos Galler, and he is such a great resource for you guys. I know he can't come to our meetings because he's busy with other projects, but literally you guys can email him whatever questions you want about getting involved in research, and just like literally any questions you have about research, and he'll be more than willing to be a really great resource for you guys. So I really encourage you guys to reach out to him.
If you guys want to get involved in the Delftia project, that's what my presentation was about. And if I do a lot of presentations, probably going to be about that because I have to do a lot of research on it. But I put my email in the chat. So if you guys want to get involved in the Delftia project, please reach out to me. I can reach out to the lab, like the manager or whatever, and then also Dr. Galler if anyone's really interested. He's the sweetest, and he'll like let you basically do research on whatever aspect you're interested in.
And he knows a ton of people.
He also, Mohammed, he's another co-president. He did BitSure over the summer, and that's also under the biotechnology program. Dr. Galler works with the biotechnology program.
I have one last question. So for the blog, do I have to do anything or summarize my presentation? Or?
Mm-hmm.
We'll email you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, everyone.